Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming out tonight for the 50th anniversary celebration of the designation of the St. Mark's Historic District. My name is Berman. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenwich Society for Historic Preservation. I want to thank our co-sponsors and co-hosts for the evening, St. Mark's Church-in-the-Bowery, the Historic Districts Council, the Neighborhood Preservation Center, the 10th and Stuyvesant Street Block Association, the Poetry Project, and Facey, who will be feeding us all afterwards. So this is really a wonderful evening. It's one of many programs that GBSHP puts on throughout the year. Some of you I know are regulars and have been to many of our programs before. Others, this may be new or first time. We conduct about 60 or 70 programs a year, most free and open to the public, designed to help celebrate, educate about, and preserve the special architectural and cultural heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. And certainly tonight's event fits right in with that, as the St. Mark's Historic District is really such an incredibly special part of our neighborhoods, whether it's in terms of our architecture, or the history, or the culture, and so much more. So we're going to hear from some great speakers tonight, and I just want to briefly say who they are, and I'll introduce them more fully when they come up to speak. But in addition to myself, tonight we'll be hearing from Facey from the Landmark Fund and the Neighborhood Preservation Center, the Reverend Sawyer from the St. Mark's in the Bowery Church, Marilyn Appleberg from the 10th and Stuyvesant Streets Block Association, and many other things, and Ellen Allen from the Poetry Project. So I will start tonight's presentation. The St. Mark's Historic District is really a jewel in the crown of historic preservation in New York City, one of the city's loveliest and most richly layered enclaves. And I don't just say that because we at GBSHP have called it our home for 20 years. I can remember first encountering these streets as a young teenager and the surprise and joy of coming upon this incredibly well-preserved oasis in the midst of the hubbub of the East Village. Of course, it's no mere accident that these 36 buildings on 3 blocks developed in their distinctive manner, nor is it that they have remained preserved in this state more than 200 years later. This entire area was developed as part of the Bowery or farm established in 1651 by Petrus Stuyvesant, the last Dutch governor of New Amsterdam. Stuyvesant's chapel was here, built in 1660 on the site of today's St. Mark's Church, where we are right now, making the church the oldest site of continuous worship in New York City. Stuyvesant Street's full original extent, stretching from the Bowery to the East River at 15th Street, see it here, was laid out in 1787 with a grid of streets around it, none of which survive today, but which were named for Stuyvesant's descendants who continued to live in this area for hundreds of years later. In 1795, the cornerstone was laid for St. Mark's Church, which retained the burial vault of Peter Stuyvesant underneath, where he remains to this day, along with 8 generations of Stuyvesants who were subsequently interred. The original stone church was completed in 1799, the portico in 1828, and the steeple in 1854. But the church is neither the oldest building in the district nor the only superlative found within its bounds. The house at 44 Stuyvesant Street, completed in 1795 for Stuyvesant's descendant, Nicholas William Stuyvesant, and his wife, Catherine Livingston Reed, was built as a freestanding home at the corner of Stuyvesant and the no longer extant Judith Street, named for Stuyvesant's wife. It is one of the handful of 18th century houses that survive in Manhattan, and the oldest house in Manhattan still used as a residence. And when you leave this evening, if you're not familiar with 44, you can see it right outside the door. The Hamilton Fish or Stuyvesant Fish House at 21 Stuyvesant Street was built by Peter Stuyvesant, the great-grandson of the original Peter Stuyvesant, for his daughter Elizabeth at the time of her marriage to Revolutionary War hero Nicholas Fish. Fish was a close friend of Alexander Hamilton and executor of his estate. In honor of his friend, he named his son, who was born here at 21 Stuyvesant Street in 1808, Hamilton Fish. The younger Fish would go on to serve as New York State Governor and Senator, as well as Secretary of State. When General Lafayette returned to America 50 years after the Revolutionary War, a reception honoring him was thrown by the Stuyvesants and the Fishes at 21 Stuyvesant Street. The house now serves as the home of the President of Cooper Union. But perhaps the most striking array of houses in the district are actually the newest. Wrapped around the intersection of Stuyvesant and East 10th Street, Renwick Triangle was built on the site of Elizabeth Fish's garden, an undeveloped plot of land across from the church, which the homeowners on surrounding lots used. Now, this is a picture of Stuyvesant Street from 1856. This grassy, rather triangular area here is Elizabeth Fish's garden before it was demolished to make way for the houses of Renwick Triangle. You can see 21 Stuyvesant Street over here, and 44 Stuyvesant Street would be just over here. But after Fish died in 1854, the garden was sold off for development with the houses we see today, which were completed in 1861. They're considered exemplars of the then fashionable Anglo-Italianate style, which most of the rest of the houses in the district, also built in 1861, similarly exhibit. They are also the only such triangle of houses in New York attributed to the esteemed 19th century architect James Renwick, perhaps best known as the architect of nearby Grace Church, St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. Almost from the beginning, the elegant houses of Renwick Triangle stood in marked contrast to the increasingly working class and immigrant character of the surrounding neighborhood. By the late 19th century, the district was in the midst of the teeming and boisterous Klein Deutschland, the largest German-speaking community outside of Berlin and Vienna. By the early 20th century, it stood cheek by jowl with the Yiddish Rialto along 2nd Avenue, and the Lower East Side's Jewish community, which stretched from 14th Street to below Canal Street, and at the time was the largest in the world. Soon these waves of immigrants were joined by Italians, Russians, Poles, Ukrainians, and Puerto Ricans, as well as artists and writers. Some of the most notable residents of the St. Mark's Historic District during these years include architect Stanford White, on the left, photographer Diane Arbus, next to him, who, in a case of strange bedfellows, were next-door neighbors at 118 and 120 East 10th Street, albeit they missed each other by about a century. Painter Saul Leiter was also a resident of 10th Street. And by the time the latter two were here, Leiter and Arbus, many of the houses of the district were transformed from single-family homes to rooming houses. It was around this time that this area, like much of New York, faced the twin threat of decline and abandonment and urban renewal by the likes of Robert Moses, who proposed to demolish several nearby blocks. And actually, if you look at this map over here, you can see the proposed Cooper Square urban renewal area, which came right up to Stuyvesant Street and went south of Houston Street all the way to Delancey. But the residents and institutions of what is now the St. Mark's Historic District pushed back on this, as great efforts were made to maintain and restore properties in the neighborhood, and once the New York City Landmarks Law was enacted in 1965 to seek landmark protections for the somewhat miraculously preserved district. The Stuyvesant Fish House at 21 Stuyvesant Street and St. Mark's Church became two of the city's first designated landmarks in 1965 and 1966 respectively, in each case with the enthusiastic support of the building's owners. In 1969, with the support of those same owners and those of most of the houses in the district, the St. Mark's Historic District became only the 10th historic district in all of New York City. For many years, it remained the only historic district in the East Village until 2012, when again activists, including GBSHP, were able to help secure designation of two new historic districts in the neighborhood: the East 10th Street Historic District on Tompkins Square North and the East Village Lower East Side Historic District, effectively increasing tenfold the historic district protections in the East Village. Of course, January 14th, 1969, the date of the designation of the district, is not the end of the story. In 1984, local advocates led by the panelist Marilyn Appleberg and the 10th and Stuyvesant Street Block Association were able to secure a 2-building extension of the historic district to include 104 and 102 East 10th Street, which bordered a development site on 3rd Avenue being assembled for what would become a massive and winding dorm. And those same residents and advocates came together when a pillar of the local community, Abe Laywald of the 2nd Avenue Deli, was gunned down to have the park on 2nd Avenue, Stuyvesant, and 10th Street in front of St. Mark's Church and across from what was the deli, renamed in his honor. 50 years after its landmark designation, the St. Mark's Historic District is a more vital mix of dedicated residents and institutions than ever. The district remains a peaceful, broad-thinking oasis whose residents are as devoted to improving the lot of their historic neighborhood as they are to making their world a better place. We are proud to have been one small part of that magical amalgam for the last 20 years, and like many of you, hope to be part of it for many more. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Stephen Facey. Stephen is a trustee of the St. Mark's Landmark Fund and chair of the Neighborhood Preservation Center Advisory Committee. For 22 years, he served as the executive vice president of the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, coordinating cultural, educational, social outreach, and preservation. Mr. Facey also developed the arts projects at St. Mark's Church-in-the-Bowery and coordinated the Preservation Youth Project, a work and training program for young residents of the church's Lower East Side neighborhood. Please join me in welcoming.
So I was asked to speak a little bit about the arts at St. Mark's and the history of their development, particularly organizationally. And though we're celebrating 50 years of preservation, St. Mark's has certainly been integrally involved in preservation efforts of all kinds, including on this building over those 50 years. We're also really celebrating about 100 years of real serious engagement with artists. And thank you. Commencing actually in 1990, when the then Rector William Norman Guthrie established an arts committee, which comprised residents of what was known as the St. Mark's Garth Apartments, which went right up this north side of 10th Street in this district. And among those on that arts committee were Khalil Gibran, Rachel Lindsay, and Edna St. Vincent Millay. In 1920, Solon Borglum was commissioned by Guthrie to sculpt the 2 Indian statues that are out on the front portico, actually inscribed at the bottom, Aspiration and Inspiration. And they stand today as a reminder, as Guthrie wished, that this was Indian land. In 1922, Guthrie had become rector in 1911. By then, as Andrew was referring to, the neighborhood had really changed, and the congregation here had, through a lot of reports, dwindled to about 18 members as the older Fish and Stuyvesant and Minthorne families had moved on. So in 1922, he was really trying to attract people to the church by creating a number of unusual services and liturgies that incorporated arts and literature and various religious traditions. And in 22, he proposed that dancers be trained to interpret religion. This was the seed of a growing conflict with the Bishop of New York, William Manning. Well, you hear stories I did over the years that Isadora Duncan danced on the altar. There's actually no record of that. However, probably more scandalously, that same year, Guthrie invited Duncan to speak on Christmas Eve. The subject, the moralizing effect of dancing on the human soul. This encouraged Bishop Manning to persuade Guthrie to recall the invitation, which he did. In 1923, on the Feast of the Annunciation, He sponsored a eurythmic dance performance, which comprised 6 women from Barnard. Actually, I have a photograph of this. Dancing from the Della Robbia, which is in the parish hall. If you're familiar with the parish hall, you know the Della Robbia. And they were dancing barefoot. So a reporter was here, and there were many newspapers in New York at the time, and he referred to them as dancing, quote, bare-legged and bare-hipped. Well, he later actually showed up at the rectory to apologize to Guthrie, given New York's then multiple newspapers and other publications, as we would say today, the story went viral, which was enough for Bishop Manning to cease any formal visitations to St. Mark's throughout Guthrie's long tenure, which didn't end until 1937. Undaunted, Martha Graham danced at the church in 1930, as did Ruth St. Denis in 1933, with Guthrie reciting St. Denis's poems between what the New York Times described as her exotic religious dances. Among many other notable participants in St. Mark's Sunday Symposiums, which is a program that he began, were William Carlos Williams, Amy Lowell, Eva LeGallienne, and Stuyvesant, Houdini, Carl Sandburg, and Walter Houston, who reportedly appeared costumed as Peter Stuyvesant. All of this not to mention Guthrie's commissioning of Frank Lloyd Wright for the design, which took from 1927 to 31, of 3 or 4 all-glass apartment towers that actually would have replaced most of the land to the east on 11th Street and 10th Street. And they stemmed, interestingly, from Wright's vision for what was known as Usonia, which was a new American culture based on the synthesis of architecture and landscape. And of course, Guthrie's dream, I can guess, of an enhanced rental stream. Sound familiar? But the project fell apart for lots of different reasons, mostly because it was the beginning of the Depression. And though the concepts were later materialized, there is an office building, the W. Price Tower in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, that is actually one of these towers. It stands today. So I'm conscious of time. A lot of things happened after his reign, World War II, post-World War II. But the next resurgence of the arts was in 1959, when the Reverend Michael Allen became rector. At that time, W.H. Auden was a parishioner, though famously upset at Allen's activism. Auden contributed to the writing of special liturgy for midweek services here, which was utilized throughout Michael's tenure. I know this from my conversations with him, but I believe that he really prophetically understood the cultural and political ferment that we as a nation were encountering in the late 50s, post the McCarthy hearings, civil rights movement was at its height. St. Mark's was very actively engaged in his first years in the effort to integrate Stuyvesant Town and Peter Cooper Village. Went on, the congregation was from this neighborhood and also from the projects on Avenue D. And there were marches to the south during the freedom marches. And then, of course, there was the emergent Vietnam War and the peace movement, in which St. Mark's was very, very active under his leadership. In Allen's view, artists were among the few people in society who were, as he put it, doing theology. That, in essence, I think, is what the arts projects are still about today at St. Mark's. In 1961, Archie Shepp, a member of Umber, which was a black arts collective, began organizing free jazz concerts in the church's West Yard on Sunday afternoons. In July of 1963, the Umber Collective held a Freedom North Arts Festival, saluting the freedom movement and showcasing the work of African-American painters, sculptors, photographers, poets, and musicians. In 1964, Ralph Cook, an aspiring theater director who attended services with his family here, told Allen that he and Sam Rogers, the Village Cake busboy and aspiring playwright, wished to create an experimental playwrights workshop. Soon thereafter, several months thereafter, Michael designated Ralph as the lay minister to the arts at St. Mark's, and he provided space in the rectory basement, where the Neighborhood Preservation Center is now, for the theater workshop. In March 1964, the workshop, now Theater Genesis, mounted its first production. Studies in Color. It was actually 3 one-act plays by Malcolm Boyd, directed by Woody King Jr. Malcolm Boyd has some renown on his own, and Woody King Jr. you may know is the person who founded the New Federal Theater at Henry Street Settlement. In October 1964, Theater Genesis produced the first 2 plays by Sam Rogers, now known as Sam Shepard, Cowboys and Harpo. And this was sort of an embryonic moment in the development of theater in New York City. Genesis was one of 4 original, before there was the term, off-Broadway theaters, along with Cafe Chino, Judson Poets Theater, and Le Mans. In 1965, Allen invited a Genesis audience member to coordinate screenings of experimental films, which was a well-attended series at a time when the city had banned so-called underground films. And in January 1966, largely at the urging of poet Paul Blackburn, St. Mark's gave the displaced poets from the Cafe Metro, which was just down the street, a home. So these 3 arts initiatives, Theater Genesis, what became the film project, and the poetry project, set the stage for what was called the Arts Projects at St. Mark's. And the startup funding for these projects came from a government agency, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. 2 New School sociologists, Harry Silverstein and Bernie Rosenberg, had come to Allen with a proposal to provide a grant for the arts projects to be their project with no input at all into what the projects were doing, because they wanted to study the growing community of so-called dropouts that were coming to the Lower East Side, but particularly were audience members attending the workshops. And that led to a 2-year grant, initial grant of $200,000, a little less than $200,000, which was awarded as direct support of those of the arts projects. And as I still like to tell the artists here, that grant came from a subdivision of HEW, the Office of Juvenile Delinquency. It's interesting, the context of UNISCA, the New York State Council of the Arts, which I think was formed in '65, didn't start getting grants until 1967. The NEA was developed sometime thereafter, so there was really no kind of grant culture, but those 2 years led to the Ford Foundation establishing experimental theater program. That's how Genesis got funded for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years of its existence. And then lots of other kinds of foundations began to participate in funding the arts in New York City. The film project really proved to be the shortest lived, and in some ways maybe the longest, due in part to the high cost of rental equipment, but also there were a difference between the 2 co-directors, Ken Jacobs and Stan Kay. And eventually it left, I think, in 1967 and formed the Millennium Film Workshop, which was on East 4th Street for some 40 years, then moved to Bushwick. It may in fact still be operative. After a 14-season run in the spring of 1978, just before the fire at St. Mark's, Genesis decided to take a break and cease producing. Ralph Cook and a number of the playwrights had moved on. The theater had produced some 100 new plays by dozens of new playwrights. And the theater landscape in New York was changing rapidly. There were now dozens and dozens of off-Broadway theaters, many venues for playwrights to go to. Genesis plays usually came out of Monday night workshops experimentally and then decide what they would produce out of that, but you could almost go anywhere and have those readings. After the post-fire restoration from 1992 to 2010, Richard Foreman's ontological hysteric theater became resident, occupied during its last 5 years by a program of Richard Foreman's called the Incubator Theater Project, which was very influential. And now the theater space is home to the New York Theater Ballet. So that's that phase. I'd like if I have a minute. Oh, good, 3 minutes, even better. Preservation. As Andrew said, St. Mark's was designated in 1966, followed by the district itself in 1969. I was telling Marilyn earlier, I just heard this anecdotally when I first came here in '67, that, so I don't know if it was the '66 designation or the '69 district designation, where St. Mark's lent its parish secretary to the Landmarks Commission to write up the reports because they were so understaffed, and they were very frustrated here that things weren't moving more quickly. As artists were finding a home here, this is all at the same time as the arts groups I described, were finding a home here. The church building was being vandalized more or less weekly by then local bands of youth, primarily Polish, Ukrainian, Italian, Germans, that were still in the immediate neighborhoods to the south and east of us. And the historic burial sites, the graveyards, had also suffered years of neglect with more or less a century of deferred maintenance, while at the same time, the yards were increasingly being used as play spaces by by numerous local daycare groups, and kind of a lot of informal daycare groups at the time. The grounds were fenced off, which made them a safe space, even if the conditions inside were somewhat hazardous. As you may know, the vault markers here are flat vault markers, but by that time, some of them were like 1.5 foot above the ground. They were really hazardous because the erosion had just taken away all of the land around it. These related situations provided the impetus for the creation of a summer and after-school youth program, became later the Preservation Youth Project, that proved to be a pioneer project in urban preservation. With the support of Mayor Lindsay and the police commissioner, among the Preservation Youth Project's first employees were 4 young people who had recently been arrested for breaking into and stealing equipment from the church offices. In 1967, under the design supervision of Edelman & Salzman architectural firm, and PYP's initial task was to reclaim the neglected graveyards as community parks. The crew were trained and supervised by skilled artisans, mostly drawn from the St. Mark's arts community. By completion of the West Yard in 1975, beginning the summer and after-school program, the Preservation Youth Project has grown to some 20 members and geographically had expanded throughout the Lower East Side to the Avenue D projects, down through Baruch houses, and actually through cousins and friends. There was a fairly substantial contingent from Harlem and the Bronx. Recognizing that in the mid-70s and the financial crisis then, most of the 16 to 19-year-old participants in this program were school leavers, dropouts. And so we applied successfully to a one-year program at the National Endowment for the Arts called City Spirit, and the Youth Conservation and Community Improvement Program that the federal government was sponsoring for youth work to support a full-time work training program. So with this support, in 1975, the overall paint-up, fix-up, along with the restoration of the 18th century fence and the steeple for which a professional contractor was engaged, an across-the-board program upgrade, including the removal of the remaining pews in this space to accommodate dance space, which I didn't mention earlier. The dance space was founded in 1974 by Larry Fagan of the Poetry Project. So my time is up. So I just wanted to say, in principle, the rebuilding of the church seemed worthy of everyone's effort, not only because it was a historic and architectural landmark, but because of what it meant to be to everybody's daily life. The more the building we could reclaim from its deterioration, the more the young people would see the connection between the institution and themselves. One thing important to remember when I close here, local residents here, Bill and George of Delano, formed the Friends of St. Mark's Committee in 1975. And then after the fire in 1978, that became the Citizens of St. Mark's, Save St. Mark's, and then ultimately the St. Mark's Historic Landmark Fund. After all the work was done, the theater space returned in 1988 to Rector, Berman, and the Landmark Fund has sponsored the Neighborhood Preservation Center as part of a strategy funded by the Wesley T. Burns Charitable Trust to rebuild that building. So I'm off the outside. Thank you.
So our next speaker is the Reverend Ann Sawyer. The Reverend Sawyer is a graduate of the University of Arizona, where she earned her BA, the University of Chicago, where she earned her MA, and the Harvard Divinity School, where she earned her Master's in Divinity. She co-founded and served as head of school at Imago Dei Middle School and served as clergy at St. Andrew's Church, Grace St. Paul's Church, and most recently at St. Philip's in the Hills in Tucson. She joined St. Mark's Church in 2017. Please join me in welcoming the Reverend Ann Sawyer.
Good evening. It's lovely to be with you. Andrew, thank you so much for your hospitality and organizing this wonderful event, as well as your entire team for hosting us. Also, I knew better than to go before Stephen Facey, because Stephen didn't really mention the fact that he has lived here and has been associated with St. Mark's for nearly that 50 years that we are celebrating tonight. And he was intimately involved in terms of providing leadership, coming together with Michael Allen to support and to create the Poetry Project and Dance Space and the Genesis Theater, all of that, he was at the heart of that work that was done in the past, along with the Youth Preservation Project. So it's humbling to stand here as I hear the rich history of St. Mark's. It's humbling to stand in the presence of those who have devoted their lives to historic preservation and to this place and have made it possible to preserve the rich history here in New York City. And the leaders that have gone before. I'm the 14th rector of St. Mark's, which is quite astonishing given the founding in 1699. And I too would have started, if I was reflecting back upon the 50 years, I would have gone back to Norman Guthrie and his connection with the arts. I would have highlighted Michael Allen and again his connection and expansion of the arts and the birth of these art projects here at St. Mark's. It was Norman Guthrie's leadership at that time, based upon what I am told, that he acquired several buildings on 10th Street and on 11th Street. And I was told they were flop houses at one point in time. He had the vision of turning them into artist studios. He had the vision of creating open space where the lights would shine in and provide that atmosphere for artists to bring into creation the expressions that exist in this world. And so he invested in the neighborhood. Michael Allen, during his time with us, ended up selling those properties. It was a decision of the vestry to go ahead and sell those properties, and that generated income that was then invested in these art projects. So in the very beginning, there was a very intimate relationship between the arts projects and the church, with them coming together, as I'm told, and Stephen was there, so he can hold me accountable for what I say, but coming together on a weekly basis and thinking about how best to support each other, and at that point, really theology and the arts and ministry here within this place and in the neighborhood were fully integrated during that time. That continued along with the backdrop of the civil rights and action and a passion for justice within this place that has always been present among the congregation that would gather here on Sunday. In the 60s, that continued up until the time of the fire, and it was the fire at that point that I think really ushered in between the first fire here in the sanctuary when they were finishing a restoration project, there was a spark and it caught a beam and they lost the entire roof of this building. And it was really the neighborhood and Marilyn Upperberg and others that came together to save St. Mark's. And then 10 years later, you might know there was again a fire, as Stephen mentioned, in the Rectory as well. And those same folks, some of whom maybe you and you were active in the life of St. Mark's at that time, then came together, shifted focus from the church to the rectory. But that really ushered in a period of about 25 years where the church really struggled. Between those two fires, the congregation that would gather here on Sundays and were actively involved dropped to less than 20. And it was really it would have been very easy to close, and in fact, at some point, the bishop sent a priest here to close St. Mark's as a church, but the people would not let it die. There was a tenacity and a fight, even among the group of parishioners that lived through both fires and during that very difficult time, that kept St. Mark's alive. During that time, I just want to acknowledge this relationship between the church and the arts, because in the beginning, while I said they sold the buildings and the church invested in the arts, during that period of 25 years, the arts then became the source of support for the church. It's quite beautiful in that sense. When the church could no longer support itself, the arts grew in strength. And as the arts projects, dance space and the poetry project and the theater, as they grew in strength, they then gave back and allowed the church to weather that difficult time period up until the time that they called the previous rector, Winnie Marguzzi. She came as a priest in charge. The church still couldn't support a rector at that time. And she then provided some structure. She did some difficult work as well. She, during that time when the arts grew in strength and the church had shrunk, there was a void, and so of course we moved into that void and we claimed that space. But for the church to come back to life, we had to push back on some of those relationships, which never feel good. So it's a living relationship. It has been for so many years. Today, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be in relationship with these incredible arts partners. I'm honored to serve as the rector and to gather with our congregation on Sunday mornings at 10:30. We are anywhere from 60 to 90 individuals who gather in the round in this space. One thing that's really unique about St. Mark's, which is a part of its history, is that it's always been passionate about issues of justice. It's always been passionate about radical welcome. So even while it could barely support itself, it undertook the restoration of the portico. And in the past year, in addition to the portico, we were able to repair the sidewalk. We were able to restore the clock towers with the support of NPC and the Landmark Fund. And there's work to be done, and the future is bright. We're at a really good place in time where the church is alive, our arts partners are doing great. We're in this beautiful building, which needs some repair. So as I close this, in addition to the initiatives that we've taken on in this short period of time, it is our hope to restore beauty to the interior of St. Mark's. Sadly, the copper gutters have failed, and they've been failing since the early 2000s, and we've attempted to repair them, but they continue to leak, and so the damage that you see above is a result of the copper gutters that have failed and water draining inside and damaging the plaster. So it's our hope to raise $500,000, ideally by this spring, so that we can repair the gutters, really for generations to come. We can, if we do it by May, we can use insurance money to repair the plaster, we can paint, we can recarpet, and then this place will shine not only from the inside, but from the outside as well. It's a beautiful, stately building. It's here in the heart of the East Village. It's home to so many organizations, to the artists, to the church, to our historic preservationists, and we're so incredibly grateful for our partnership with Greenwich, as well as the Historic Districts Council and the Landmark Fund, all of whom occupy the rectory at this point, that it's this vibrant community as a result of this old church, and many of you who have come together to support this place over the course of many years, for which I give thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Our next speaker is Marilyn Appledorf. Marilyn is a published author, community advocate, longtime president of the 10th and Stuyvesant Street Block Association, founder of Music in Aid Lake Wall Park, and a recipient of a GBSHP Award in 2012, as well as a 50-year resident of East 10th Street. So please join me in welcoming Marilyn Appledorf.
The district was designated January 14, 1969. Coincidentally, I moved from my parents' house in Queens to East 10th Street on January 26, 1969. So I'm about to celebrate a 50th year anniversary as well. And incidentally, I live in one of those former St. Mark's Garth apartments with the artist windows, although I'm a writer. The 10th and Stuyvesant Street's Block Association was formed sometime in '68, before I arrived, to join in the community battle to retain the low-rise character of 3rd Avenue. Developers were banking on getting the city to make the zoning on the avenue amenable to 40-story luxury residential buildings. They had already torn down everything but the lab on the east side of the avenue from 9th Street to 12th Street and put up some parking lots. On the south side of 10th Street, next to one of the parking lots, were 2 houses mysteriously left out of the district designation in 1969. I say mysteriously because 102, the first house on that side, was the oldest on the street, dating from 1834. Mysterious. They looked awfully vulnerable with development pressure building, so solving the mystery became urgent. I discovered that at the time of the landmarking, 104 was owned by our then city council member, Saul Sherrison, and allegedly, he was the one who kept 104, and by virtue of geography, 102 out of the district. Indeed, there is evidence, and I have it, that those 2 buildings had been in the original designation and then removed. So in 1983, I petitioned the Landmarks Preservation Commission to get these 2 houses landmarked and avoid almost certain demolition. But there was still much resistance. In 1984, the lovely woman with whom I was working at the LPC, Lenore Norman, continued to say no and sent me away numerous times. At that point, I can only describe my behavior as akin to a junkyard dog, and I had hold of her ankle. I only let go when she said LPC would take it up. At the public hearing, we filled the room and 25 of our members spoke, and as prearranged, each one used the phrase, the puzzling omission. Belatedly but happily, on June 19, 1984, the LPC deemed 102 and 104 East 10th Street to be an intrinsic part of the St. Mark's Historic District, becoming the St. Mark's Historic District Extension, a very sweet victory indeed. As head of the Block Association, I made extending, protecting, and beautifying the district our mission. So also on our agenda was the abused and misused triangular open space in front of St. Mark's Church, a filthy, dark, and dangerous gateway to the historic district, and a disgraceful eyesore in the foreground of such an important historic, social, and cultural landmark. In 1981, I obtained a volunteer permit for us to do work in the park, but not before having to let the New York City Parks Department know it was theirs, and they should better come clean it. We got the liquor store to stop selling pint bottles, the 9th Precinct got rid of the bogus taxi stand, and block residents installed the flagpole garden and fenced the triangle garden. But I knew I had to change how the park was used in order to change who used it. And what better way to do that than with music? So the Block Association partnered with Beth Blusser at the 3rd Street Music School to start a free noontime concert series every Thursday in June and July. Although Beth and I both retired 2 years ago as producers of the series, now in its 39th year, it has become a major public program of the 3rd Street Music School. The space is now called A. Bowl Park after a man who, when he learned of my goal for the park, asked, "How can I help?" when almost everyone else said, "It will never be any different." At the end of every concert, as a big incentive for people to stay a while, he served chopped liver and tuna snacks. A blurb in one of the papers a couple of years ago likened it to a European plaza. Another joy. Next on the Block Association agenda was to right another wrong. In the 70s, the city removed and discarded the historic Bishop's Brook lamppost, which graced the historic district, and replaced them with the very aptly named Cobras. In 1999, we raised $30,000 from Block residents, had the Bishop's Crooks replicated in Pennsylvania, and gifted them to the city. Their return does much to enhance the historic essence of the district. In 2001, a new and unique threat loomed. Cooper Union had bought a portion of the Stuyvesant roadway that ran between 3rd and 4th Avenue from the city in 1959 for $1,000. But the deed restricted its use to academic purposes. Cooper Union wanted that deed restriction lifted to allow a non-academic office building to be built to the property line on the site of their former engineering building. As a member of the Community Board's task force, I rallied the troops once again, this time to save the Stuyvesant View Corridor, which I may have invented. With the help of all of the invaluable preservation organizations, our elected officials, the restriction was not lifted, and Cooper returned 80% of the roadway to public use. That's why there's a plaza there instead of a brick wall, and why we are still able to see the foundation building from 3rd Avenue. When you look west, you can also have an unimpeded view from Stuyvesant, Manhattan's only true east-west street. Our most recent battle to protect and preserve the St. Mark's Historic District came last year, when an Australian-owned real estate investment trust planned to add an enormous and very visible 2-story addition to the 3-story landmark 104 East 10th Street. With the invaluable help of GVSHP, especially Andrew, and so many others, it was denied. Unfortunately, the LPC voted to allow a 1-story addition. It's now back on the market as it continues to fall into further disrepair. This is the time for an angel to come to the rescue, perhaps a descendant of Rutherford Stuyvesant, who built 102 and 104. It's a romantic notion, I know, but so is the idea of preservation in a city like New York, and that makes all of you romantics as well. The St. Mark's Historic District creates a shared sense of time and space, and because of the ongoing efforts of people who care, it resonates with pride and energy. I feel privileged to live in the heart of it, and I am grateful to the members of the 10th and Stuyvesant Streets Block Association, past, present, and future, for being part of its continuing saga. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we have Ellen Nguyen, who's lived in the East Village for over 40 years. She has been part of the Poetry Project all that time, including as a board member from 1995 to 2017. She's the author of many books, including most recently, Now That I Know Where I'm Going. She has a 3rd-degree black belt and has been 86th from every laundromat between Broadway and Avenue B, which you think that black belt would keep that from happening, but apparently not. You can visit ellennoyen.com for more information, and please join me in welcoming Ellen.
It's really an honor to be up on stage and in this room with so many knowledgeable and dedicated people. So I'm here representing the Poetry Project, one of the arts projects. And before I read some poems, I want to tell you how I ended up here. So I was living up in Maine, one of those teenage dropouts that Stephen Facey was mentioning, where I met the poet Joel Oppenheimer, an early director of the Poetry Project. And he said, "You should be a poet. And if you're going to be a poet, you have to move to New York." So I packed up my stuff and I moved to New York and found an apartment to share on Thompson Street. That was November of 1976. That same month was the first time I set foot in this building. It was an event to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the death of the poet Frank O'Hara. Now, I had never heard of Frank O'Hara. I'd never heard of any of the people in the lineup, except one, the one famous poet in America, Allen Ginsberg. So I came, and I remember sitting in the back and looking at the people who were standing right where I'm standing now, and really not understanding their in-jokes or their stories or the poems, but really feeling thrilled, even though I didn't know why. But what I remember the most vividly about that evening was my feeling of relief at getting back safely to the West Village from dark, dangerous 2nd Avenue. 2 months later, I moved into the apartment where I still live on 1st Avenue and 1st Street and started coming regularly to the Poetry Project, taking workshops, going to readings, many readings a week. I met my best friend of over 40 years in my first workshop. I met my husband of 35 years through the Poetry Project. I met so many friends, colleagues, teachers, mentors, students. So the first poem I want to read is a very early work that I feel has the exuberance of how I felt when we first got here and really do still feel now. Hooray for poetry. Poetry is a great big party for all your friends. As you know them all by name, you put them in your poem. Hi Maggie, hi Rachel, hey Greg, hi. The New York poets should play musical lives with the rest of the world. Then everyone would have a pen pal. Poetry is golden oldies. Let's go to the hop, have dinner and take a walk with you. Steamy August with thighs and eyes to match. Poetry is a home movie of your mouth and fingers and heart. Poetry is talking till 4 a.m., hanging up, having accomplished a great deal. Going to the movies, sitting in the front row, turning around to see who you know that's there. Hanging out at the bar, talking about everyone who isn't there, or who is, and all the rest. Running into people on the street, telling them to tell someone else to call you. Wearing a terrific, reedy shirt from 14th Street. Poetry is a great big party. I think we should invite as many people as know my name. I'm going to read a couple from a series called The Tompkins Square Poems. 1. Where we are now, every day, with Dante. All couples are interracial. Falling a little asleep, a pleasure, tree of pink, girls in short frocks. 2. Ran into Elroy when I stopped to say hi to Marvin. And Elroy, with bike tricked out from Father's Day, walked me a block where we ran into Jack, who kind of recognized Elroy from the neighborhood, but mostly wanted to ask about Maggie. And I took pictures of Elroy smiling and Elroy soulful, then sat on a bench to read. 8. The first time I sat in Tompkins Square Park, Ted had died. We didn't care we got beat. We wanted solace. We wore torn shorts. We were so scared. If this could happen, anything could happen. If anything could happen, what was left to hope for? More good than bad, she said. More good than bad. Okay, I'm already leaving the neighborhood a little bit. From Williamsburg Bridge. A girl in white in the window. Radio plays softly, a Joplin rag. Soon she'll creak across the room, fix supper for her cranky father. She's in the whole building, the only one home. Children play stickball. Men and women buy shoes and fruit. America is rich and always possible. So I grew up in South Dakota, but I was a Yankees fan. So I wanted to read this poem, and partly for Jimmy, because he's the caretaker here. The only thing we ever talk about is our love for the Yankees. So there he is. So Jimmy's for you. The history of the human body. Winfield's infield hit. The lassitude of the infinite. Dear blank. Hi, you can be in my new poem if you're a Yankees fan. Or if you're a baseball fan. I just remembered you're from the coast. Listen, as long as you're here, you might as well stay. It's just that I wanted to write this poem about baseball, having 3 baseball titles and all, but one for you, too, on the chance that's what it'll take for you to fall in love with me. I used to seduce this gay friend that way, a poem a day under his door. The closest I got was the big if. If I ever, you'll be the one. My stomach leaping like a trout, and all I know is your eyes and mechanics' forearms. Yeah, but what about this goddamn famous old-time electricity? I haven't felt this way in years. It's better than having a crush on Lou Piniella. And hooray, we're back to baseball. Jose Carmel once in winter ball wouldn't play for 3 days because his uniform wasn't tight enough. Oh, the sex object. Winfield flings the ball to the shortstop, who wings it on into the catcher, swinging Rick Cerrone. It's the springtime of phylogeny, and my ontogeny is throbbing in all its bristly prehistoric cells. I'm either having a nervous breakdown or falling in love. Yeah, so my favorite number is 14, Lou's Yankee number, of course, and my Nicaraguan lover, a power hitter who smashed a homer the night after and tipped his cap to me coming into third. 14. My skirt's plaid and too long, like my sentences, chalking Play-Doh on the sidewalk, worrying, without grace, this in between my baseball days. At 10, I loved the Yankees because they won. At 25, love them again for what I can't do. No self-consciousness of body or mind, like perfect conversation late at night. I'm a terrible comedian because I have no sense of timing. I gotta always say everything I think. Well, Vera said he'd rather die like a dog than hurry by a second a sentence not right. I like those goddamn green bananas. So I think this is the first poem where you're going to notice a little of my prairie side coming in. I probably write more poems about South Dakota and being from out west than I do about New York. And for a long time I was like, oh, what am I really? Where am I from? Who am I? And then I finally realized it took me a long time. I thought, oh, sort of and I think everybody knows this, but I just came to it, that a New Yorker is someone who is from somewhere else. I mean, that's what makes us New Yorkers. I mean, obviously many people are from New York, but just moving at all is part of, I don't know, that's what I think. Anyway, you can decide. The only thing that's different is, you can probably hear my accent a little bit, Dakota. When I go back home, people are like, where are you from? Because I talk faster. That's the only change though. On the bus. As much sky tonight in NYC as buildings along First Ave on the bus. I'm overcome. Becky's birthday and I am on my way. 8 white wagons and 3 radios. Some are at work and some are going to work. A surveyor strolls the UN grounds. Everyone is beautiful and relieved. It's only $1. Only $1 and we can ride into the night that bears your name. There's Queens down 34th Street, wide open, the Nebraska of New York. I'm not a 14th century serf and I am no tycoon. White dress, bare legs, 93 degrees. Comfort me, come to me. I love you. My heart is innocent. Where are you going, July, New York? Sort of that explicit here and there. Somewhere else. Scrawny Euro by the river, no name for a place to be happy. In Boulder, Colorado, Kryptonic's polyurethane factory, I only liked the tracks out back, where every day I ran to watch freight trains go by, longing to go. Weeds broke the tar and tough dirt. Where I grew up, South Dakota prairie, the wind slaps like a twisted towel, moist and spanky and mean. Peonies crawl across the blackest earth. Shiny yellow tree in Lansing, Michigan. Rooming house summer in Ellsworth, Maine. South Carolina, heat and hush puppies. Maryland, crackers. I hated every place I lived, till I lived how I live now. I've got 2 real short poems and then I'll be done. This one is really a New York poem because the bar that I'm talking about was right around the corner on 2nd Avenue between 9th and 10th Street. And I can't remember the name of it, but I feel like it was a Mexican restaurant with a bar in front. Anyway, somebody might remember. What's it? No, not the Arcadia. It was between 9th and 10th. No, it wasn't the telephone. It was way before the telephone. Well, anyway, I'm sure they're trying to get me off some. A mustache and a cigarette. Our favorite bar where we head on post aerobic Sunday afternoon, and Johnny explains Irish Sunday afternoons in bars. We're not so different, he says. I like to think I'm not so different. What were Child Eleanor's Sundays? Johnny nudges, see that guy? With one little dash of his eye at the bartender, we've already cased her beautiful high face, strangely lumpy body. I see that guy's in love, and she won't give him the time of day. Except, of course, she will, enough that he keeps mooning and drinking. Knowing everything makes me feel smart and drunk. My dad didn't have Sunday guys. I'm like first-generation guy. My eyes full of strange little dashes anyone can see perfectly. And I'm going to end with a poem called American Guys, which was the title poem of an earlier book of mine. American Guys. Jack, John, Ben, and I played pool, Polish bar, 7th Street. How is it guys all know how to shoot pool? I sure don't. Hit 'em low, Ben says. I sink 3 in a row. Never done that before. Johnny walks in. I light up. Jack, John, and Ben drink beer. Johnny ale. Are we solid? I ask again. That goes on your tombstone, John says. I swill Rolling Rock. No one smokes, but the bar is smoky. The bartender throws quarters in the jukebox. I dance alone. Satisfaction. I never had so many boyfriends until I got married. They love me for being happy elsewhere. Jack scratches. I used to know how to play this game, he says. Johnny hits him hard. He too's done this before. I let the guys tell me what to do next. For once, I'm the girl. They line them up. I love American Guys, saved from knowing anything except keep one elbow up, skittering toward a side pocket. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. Thanks to all of our speakers, Stephen, Reverend Ann, Marilyn. And now we are going to close, but also enjoy some wonderful refreshments from Veselka. And I believe we're going to have a little bit of a celebratory music from Michael and Ellen Lyden. Is that correct? Do you know if they're here?
Michael Lyden.
Okay, great. So the food is being set up down here, so please join us and stick around. We've got used to the space for a while longer. Let's mix, mingle, celebrate, and thank you so much for coming out tonight.